April 14, 2016. A quiet morning in Fairmont Hills, where Pastor Gideon Greaves led his congregation in prayer, completely unaware that his world was about to be turned upside down. What began as a trusted relationship with his secretary, Lorraine Vane, would soon unravel into a chilling act of vengeance, one that would change his life forever. Pastor Gideon Greaves was a man admired by many. A devoted husband and father, he led a small but tightly knit congregation in Fairmont Hills, a town where everyone seemed to know everyone else. For years, his life appeared to embody stability in faith, his sermons inspiring countless lives. Working closely with him was Lorraine Vane, the church secretary, a reserved woman who rarely drew attention to herself but was known for her dedication to the job. Yet, beneath the calm surface of their professional relationship, tension simmered, silent, unnoticed, and building to something far darker. What unfolded next was an act so calculated and personal that it left an entire community grappling with disbelief and sorrow. This is the story of betrayal, a hidden vendetta, and a devastating plan that would forever change the life of Pastor Gideon Greaves and those who knew him. Pastor Gideon Greaves was born into modest beginnings in a small rural town not far from where he would one day establish his ministry. Raised in a family where faith was more than just a Sunday routine, it was woven into every aspect of daily life. Gideon learned early on the value of compassion, humility, and perseverance. His parents, both devout Christians, instilled in him a strong moral compass, though the family struggled financially. Those early experiences with hardship shaped the foundation of his calling. By the time Gideon reached his 20s, he had already begun his journey into ministry, taking on the role of youth leader at a local church, where his passion for guiding others quickly became apparent. Over the years, Gideon's dedication and natural ability to connect with people earned him respect and admiration. By the age of 35, he had become the lead pastor of Fairmont Hills Community Church. His sermons were known for their warmth and relatability, often drawing people from surrounding towns. Outside the pulpit, Gideon was a devoted family man, married to his college sweetheart, Rachel. Together, they had 2 children, and their life was seemingly the picture of harmony. They lived in a modest but welcoming home, often hosting church gatherings that filled their backyard with laughter and fellowship. To his congregation, Gideon was not just a spiritual leader but a man who embodied the values he preached: kindness, patience, and unwavering faith. Lorraine Vane joined the church staff in her early 30s. To most, she seemed like an ideal fit for the role of secretary, quiet, diligent, and attentive to detail. She rarely spoke about her personal life, though whispers occasionally circulated about her troubled past. It was said that Lorraine had grown up in an unstable household marked by neglect and emotional abuse. Her reserved demeanor often gave the impression that she preferred to stay in the background, unnoticed. Yet, for those who worked closely with her, there was a subtle sharpness to her personality, a sense that she was always observing, always calculating. Her relationship with Gideon was, at first, professional and uneventful. She handled administrative duties efficiently, managing schedules, coordinating events, and keeping the church running smoothly. For years, there appeared to be no conflict, no indication of the storm that was quietly brewing. But beneath the surface, their dynamic began to shift in small, almost imperceptible ways. Lorraine's demeanor toward Gideon, once respectful and deferential, started to carry a hint of tension. At times, her regrieve seemed to toe the line between professionalism and something more personal. There were moments that, in hindsight, would stand out: an unusually sharp comment during a staff meeting, a glance held just a second too long, a sudden withdrawal from group activities. Yet, at the time, these moments seemed insignificant, easy to dismiss as quirks of personality or the result of a stressful workload. Gideon, busy with the demands of his role as pastor, paid little attention to these subtleties, focusing instead on his congregation and family. For years, the relationship between Gideon and Lorraine remained largely unremarkable to the outside world. But within the walls of the church office, the seeds of something far more complex were being sown. What no one could see, what even Gideon himself failed to recognize, was that Lorraine's quiet demeanor concealed a growing resentment, a deeply personal sense of grievance that would one day drive her to take actions no one could have foreseen. By late 2015, Pastor Gideon Greaves had been a fixture in the lives of his congregation for over a decade. To the outside world, he was the embodiment of integrity, a man of God, a loving husband, and a dedicated father. But beneath the polished exterior, Gideon was struggling with the pressures of leadership and the weight of his responsibilities. In a moment of weakness, he made a decision that would later have far-reaching consequences. It started with a fleeting affair, a mistake that, though brief, would come to haunt him for the rest of his life. It wasn't a relationship built on passion, but rather a desperate search for validation and escape from the stresses that came with his role. A woman, a member of the congregation, had caught his eye, and in a moment of poor judgment, they had crossed a line. The affair was brief, just a few encounters, before it ended quietly, without any fanfare. Gideon, consumed by guilt, believed that the matter had been put behind him. He vowed to make amends with his wife and the church, hoping his misstep would remain a secret. But Lorraine Vane, the quiet secretary who had watched Gideon from the shadows for years, knew better. Over time, she had become aware of Gideon's indiscretion, though no one else suspected a thing. Lorraine, who had always harbored her own secret anger and resentment, saw this moment of weakness as an opportunity. She had been waiting for this, waiting for a reason, a means to exact her revenge, and now, it had presented itself. In her mind, this was more than just an affair, it was a betrayal of trust, a violation of the sacred vows that Gideon preached every Sunday. For Lorraine, it wasn't just about the affair, it was about everything she had endured at his hands over the years. She believed that she had been overlooked, undervalued, and ultimately betrayed by the very man she had once respected. This affair, in her eyes, was the final straw, the spark that would ignite her plan. The more Lorraine thought about it, the clearer her course of action became. She needed to hurt him. But it couldn't be something as simple as a confrontation. No, this needed to be something that would not only destroy him but would ensure he never saw it coming. It had to be something that would leave him broken, physically and emotionally, while preserving her own anonymity. After all, if she was going to destroy him, she couldn't let him trace it back to her. Lorraine's first step in her twisted scheme was to secure a way to carry out her plan. She did her research, and it didn't take long for her to find a way. She knew where to find the drugs that could infect someone with HIV, and she understood how to administer them in a way that wouldn't raise any immediate red flags. She didn't want to leave any trace of her involvement, and she was meticulous in her preparation. With the virus in hand, Lorraine bided her time, waiting for the perfect moment to put her plan into action. Her method was simple but effective. She knew Gideon well, his routine, his habits, his vulnerabilities. Lorraine waited for a time when she and Gideon would be alone, a time when no one would suspect anything. She waited for a day when she could slip the virus into his drink without him noticing. It was a calculated move, and she made sure to cover her tracks. No one would know, not at first. But the damage would be done. As the virus silently entered his system, Gideon remained oblivious to the threat. He went about his daily life, unaware that his body was being altered in ways he couldn't control. Lorraine watched him from a distance, carefully monitoring his health. At first, there were no symptoms, no signs that anything was wrong. It was the perfect crime. He would never know what hit him. But behind Lorraine's cold exterior, there was a growing sense of satisfaction. This was her revenge, her payback for all the years of being unseen, unheard, and unnoticed. She had found a way to strip away everything that Gideon held dear, to take away his vitality and force him to confront the consequences of his actions. There was no turning back now. It started subtly, almost too subtle for anyone to notice. Gideon began feeling fatigued, unusual for someone as energetic and committed as he was. He chalked it up to the long hours spent counseling parishioners, leading services, and balancing the demands of his growing congregation. But as weeks turned into months, the symptoms became harder to ignore. Weight loss, persistent fever, and an unshakable sense of malaise began to consume him. He was a man accustomed to offering answers to others, yet he found himself with none for his own condition. When Gideon finally sought medical advice, the tests revealed the unthinkable. He sat across from his doctor as the words, "You've tested positive for HIV," echoed in the sterile, silent room. The diagnosis was a thunderclap that shattered the life he had so carefully built. In that moment, confusion flooded his mind. How could this have happened? The man who stood at the pulpit every Sunday, preaching about faith and morality, now faced a private struggle that threatened to unravel everything he stood for. At first, Gideon kept the diagnosis to himself, battling the shame and fear that came with it. He couldn't bring himself to tell his wife, his children, or his congregation. But secrets have a way of seeping through the cracks, and Gideon's condition couldn't remain hidden for long. It was during a routine conversation with a close confidant that the first thread of Lorraine's scheme began to unravel. Lorraine, the trusted secretary who had worked alongside Gideon for years, had always seemed unassuming. She handled church correspondence, organized events, and managed schedules with efficiency. But as Gideon's confidant dug deeper, inconsistencies began to surface. Suspicious gaps in Lorraine's behavior coincided with key events leading up to Gideon's illness. It wasn't until a piece of evidence, an intercepted email, a journal entry, or a careless remark, came to light that the full scope of her plan became clear. Lorraine's actions were not impulsive, they were methodical, calculated to inflict maximum harm. The discovery of how she obtained the virus and the steps she took to ensure Gideon's exposure left everyone who learned the truth stunned. She had exploited his trust, manipulated situations to her advantage, and carried out a plan that was as cold as it was devastating. When the revelation of Lorraine's role finally reached Gideon, it was a moment of crushing heartbreak. The betrayal was deeper than anything he could have imagined. Here was someone he had trusted implicitly, someone he had allowed into the most private corners of his life, and she had turned that trust into a weapon. The weight of the public fallout soon followed. News of the situation spread through the church community like wildfire, leaving whispers, judgment, and division in its wake. For Gideon, the personal toll was unbearable. He wrestled with anger, disbelief, and profound sadness. The community he had devoted his life to serving now looked at him with a mixture of pity and suspicion. His family struggled to come to terms with what had happened, and the once stable foundation of his life began to crumble beneath him. Yet through all the turmoil, one question loomed large: what could drive someone like Lorraine to commit such a calculated act of vengeance? As Gideon grappled with the fallout, the audience is left to wonder, too, slowly piecing together the depths of a betrayal that shook not just one man, but an entire community. The ripple effects of Lorraine Vane's actions began to unfold with shocking clarity. At first, Gideon didn't even realize what had happened. The symptoms were subtle enough to go unnoticed: a general sense of fatigue, occasional unexplained illnesses, a decline in his overall health. He chalked it up to stress, the mounting pressure of leading a congregation, and the weight of his personal life. After all, he had been juggling the responsibilities of being a pastor, a husband, and a father. Things had gotten overwhelming, and perhaps his body was simply telling him to slow down. But it wasn't long before those symptoms worsened. What started as a slight discomfort soon spiraled into a series of more alarming health issues. The fatigue became debilitating. He found himself frequently missing work, unable to summon the energy he once had. His immune system seemed to collapse, and he fell victim to illnesses he hadn't experienced before, strange rashes, swollen lymph nodes, and a constant low-grade fever. It wasn't until a routine visit to his doctor, after a particularly severe episode of illness, that the truth began to reveal itself. A blood test confirmed the diagnosis, HIV. For Gideon, the news was nothing short of devastating. The virus had taken hold in his body more quickly than anyone expected, and there was no doubt that he would need immediate and ongoing medical treatment. But the shock of the diagnosis was not the only weight Gideon would have to bear. His world, the very life he had built, was now crumbling before him. His first thought was of Rachel, his wife. How could he ever tell her? How could he explain that something so intimate, so devastating, had been thrust upon their family? The guilt was overwhelming, and the weight of his actions, of his affair, came rushing back to him in waves. He felt as though he had betrayed everyone who had ever trusted him, and now, the consequences were far worse than he could have ever imagined. But the physical toll on Gideon's body was just one part of the aftermath. The emotional and spiritual ramifications were even more profound. The once steadfast pastor, known for his strength and leadership, found himself struggling with feelings of shame, anger, and confusion. How could he have let this happen? How could he, someone who had dedicated his life to faith and integrity, have made such a catastrophic mistake? The very foundation of his identity was being shattered. Rachel, devastated by the news, demanded answers. The weight of Gideon's secret affair and the subsequent diagnosis tested their marriage in ways they had never anticipated. Rachel questioned everything: her trust, her understanding of their relationship, and her faith in him as both a partner and a pastor. While Gideon tried to explain, the damage was already done. Trust, once broken, is difficult to rebuild. And for Gideon, the shame of what he had done hung over him like a dark cloud. Meanwhile, the church community, which had always looked up to Gideon as a moral authority, began to question his integrity. The truth about his affair began to leak out, though not the full details of his infection, spreading through whispers and rumors among the congregation. Some members stood by him, offering prayers and support, while others felt betrayed. The church had always been a place of sanctuary, a community built on trust and faith. Now, that very foundation was shaken to its core. The impact on the congregation was profound, with some members leaving in disgust, while others questioned their own faith in the man who had once been their spiritual guide. As for Lorraine, her role in this entire tragedy remained hidden for some time. The plan had worked, at least in the short term. No one suspected her involvement, at least, not immediately. But the weight of her actions slowly began to wear on her as well. For Lorraine, this wasn't just about revenge. It was about regaining a sense of control, a feeling that she had finally taken matters into her own hands after years of feeling powerless. Yet, with the passage of time, the truth began to gnaw at her. Could she really justify what she had done? Was it worth it to destroy a man's life, a family, and an entire community for the sake of her own anger? The legal repercussions, when they finally came, were slow to materialize. Initially, the authorities had no reason to suspect foul play. There were no obvious signs that anyone had intentionally infected Gideon with HIV. The virus, after all, was not something that could be detected immediately, and there was no way to trace it back to a specific source. But as Gideon's health continued to deteriorate and the investigation into his medical history deepened, questions began to arise. How had Gideon contracted the virus, and was there a possibility that someone had deliberately exposed him? Lorraine, knowing she had covered her tracks well, remained out of sight, her guilt hidden beneath a veneer of normalcy. She continued her life as though nothing had changed. But the moral consequences of her actions weighed heavily on her conscience. She knew, in the deepest corners of her mind, that she could never truly escape the aftermath of what she had done. It wasn't just about what she had stolen from Gideon, it was about the destruction she had wrought on the lives of those around her. In the months that followed, Gideon began his slow and painful journey toward recovery, both physically and spiritually. The road ahead was long and uncertain. He sought forgiveness from Rachel, though he knew it might never come. He turned to his faith, praying for strength to rebuild his life and his relationships. But the emotional scars ran deep. He spent many nights wrestling with his own guilt, asking himself why he had let his guard down, why he had allowed his desires to cloud his judgment. The pastor who had once stood before his congregation with unwavering conviction now found himself questioning everything he had believed in. Meanwhile, questions remained about Lorraine's motivations. What drove her to take such extreme measures? Was it really just the affair, or was there something more, a deeper well of pain, resentment, or betrayal that had pushed her to act? Could this entire tragedy have been avoided if Gideon had been more careful, if Lorraine had been given the opportunity to express her frustrations in a healthier way? These questions lingered in the air, unanswered and unresolved, as the lives of those affected by this devastating betrayal continued to unfold. What would become of Lorraine? What would Gideon's future hold? Only time would reveal the full extent of the damage, and whether any form of healing could ever truly take place. What would you have done if you were in Gideon's shoes? Imagine the pressure, the guilt, the toll it would take on someone in his position. How would you have handled the situation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your insight could shed light on this dark story. As you're following along, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Stories like this keep coming, and each one is more shocking than the last. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Who do you think carries the greater blame in this tragic tale? Was Lorraine's revenge a heartless act, or was it a result of a broken system, a situation gone wrong, and years of simmering emotions? Let's talk about it in the comments. Your opinions matter. If this story captivated you, share it with a friend who loves unraveling true crime mysteries. And don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date with more gripping cases. There's always more to uncover. This story serves as a chilling reminder of just how fragile trust can be and how easily it can be shattered. One moment, everything can seem secure, and the next, a life is forever altered. The lengths to which Lorraine went to execute her plan reveal the true cost of betrayal. The ripple effects are far-reaching, extending not just to the victim, but to everyone whose life is touched by the consequences. As the story unfolded, it showed that sometimes, the scars left behind from such revenge are more profound than the initial betrayal itself. Think about it, do you believe there's a chance for redemption for both Gideon and Lorraine? Or is there a point at which some actions simply cannot be forgiven? Can someone who caused so much pain ever be truly redeemed, or is the damage irreversible? These are the questions we must ask ourselves when we consider the true price of betrayal. Thank you for joining me on this journey. As always, stay safe, stay kind, and remember, the truth has a way of coming to light, no matter how deep the secrets are buried.